It is 3:10 in the afternoon, May 31st, 1889, South Fork, Pennsylvania. The dam has been holding back 20 million tons of water for 10 years, but the fish screens are clogged, the spillway is blocked, and the water has nowhere left to go. What happens in the next 14 minutes will kill over 2,000 people. This is a story that deserves to be told carefully. Johnstown was the heart of American steel. 30,000 people lived in this narrow valley where the Conemaugh and Stony Creek rivers met. The massive Cambria Iron Works employed 7,000 workers and generated $5 million annually. More steel and iron poured out of Johnstown than anywhere else in America. The smokestacks never stopped. The furnaces never cooled. This was prosperity. This was progress. This was the future. Families had lived here for generations. Children walked to school along streets lined with company houses. Mothers hung laundry in backyards that faced the rolling hills. Fathers worked 12-hour shifts in the mills, their faces blackened with soot, their hands scarred from hot metal. It was hard work, but it was steady work. And in 1889, steady work meant everything. The city sat 14 miles downstream from Lake Conemaugh, an artificial lake created by the South Fork Dam. Most residents knew about the dam. Some worried about it. But life had a way of pushing worry aside. There were shifts to work, children to feed, bills to pay. The dam had been there for 10 years. It would be there for 10 more. On the morning of May 31st, John Park Jr. was working his shift at the Cambria Iron Works. His wife Emma was home with their 3 children. Their youngest, Horace, was just 2 years old. Emma had planned to take the children to visit her mother that afternoon, but the rain was coming down too hard. Better to stay inside. Better to wait for the storm to pass. There is a growing community of people who believe these stories deserve to be told. If you are one of them, subscribe and join us. Nobody in Johnstown knew that 14 miles upstream, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club was facing the worst crisis in its 10-year history. Their exclusive retreat was about to become the source of America's deadliest flood. 14 miles upstream from Johnstown sat one of the most exclusive clubs in America, the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. Founded in 1879. Membership cost $2,000. That is equivalent to $60,000 today. Andrew Carnegie belonged. So did Henry Clay Frick and Andrew Mellon. Pittsburgh's industrial elite had built themselves a paradise. The club featured a grand clubhouse, a yacht club, and their crown jewel, an artificial lake created by damming South Fork Creek. Lake Conemaugh stretched 3 miles long and held 20 million tons of water. It was perfect for sailing, fishing, and forgetting about the working-class city 14 miles downstream. But there was a problem. The dam had been modified extensively. The original dam, built in 1853, had been engineered with discharge pipes at the base. These pipes could release water and relieve pressure during heavy rains. The club removed them. They wanted a permanent lake, not one that drained during maintenance. They lowered the dam by 2 feet to build a carriage road across the top. This reduced the spillway capacity by 20%. They installed fish screens over the spillway to prevent their stocked bass and trout from escaping downstream. These screens would prove deadly. Daniel J. Morrell saw the danger. Morrell was president of the Cambria Iron Works. He understood that any dam failure would send a wall of water straight down the valley to his city. In 1880, he wrote directly to the South Fork Club. The dam modifications, he warned, made it unsafe. He sent his chief engineer, John Fulton, to inspect the structure. Fulton's report was damning. The dam was dangerous. The modifications violated basic engineering principles. The spillway was inadequate. The missing discharge pipes eliminated the primary safety mechanism. Fulton recommended immediate repairs. The club dismissed both the letter and the engineer's concerns. Their lawyers assured them they had no legal liability. Their wealth insulated them from consequences. And that, right there, is what should have been the warning. When the people with the power to fix something dangerous choose not to, disaster becomes inevitable. The American Society of Civil Engineers would later conclude that every single modification the club made increased the likelihood of catastrophic failure. But in 1889, the fish were more important than the physics. The storm began on May 30th. By the morning of May 31st, 6 to 10 inches of rain had fallen across western Pennsylvania in 24 hours. The lake level at South Fork was rising. Fast. John Park, the club's maintenance engineer, arrived at the dam at dawn. What he saw terrified him. Water was flowing over the spillway for the first time in the dam's history. Debris from the storm had clogged the fish screens, backing up water that should have been draining away. The lake was just 3 feet below the top of the dam. Park tried everything. He organized work crews to clear the screens. They couldn't keep up with the incoming debris. He attempted to cut a new spillway through the hillside. There wasn't enough time. He sent riders to warn the towns downstream. The telegraph lines were down. The phones were dead. At 11 in the morning, Park rode to the South Fork telegraph office. The operator was able to get one message through to Pittsburgh before the lines went down completely. The message was forwarded to Johnstown. Dam in danger. Send help immediately. But Johnstown had been flooded before. Small floods were common in the spring. Most residents assumed this was another false alarm. Some moved to higher ground. Most stayed put. Back at the dam, the water was now just 2 feet from the top. Park could see the structure beginning to sag in the middle. Small leaks appeared at the base. The earthen dam was dissolving from within. At 3:10 in the afternoon, the South Fork Dam failed. Witnesses described the sound as thunder that wouldn't stop. The entire center section of the dam collapsed at once. 20 million tons of water burst free in a wave 60 feet high, traveling at 40 miles per hour toward the valley below. The flood didn't just carry water. It picked up everything in its path. Houses, trees, railroad cars, boulders the size of buildings. The mass grew larger and more destructive with every mile, grinding everything to splinters. It reached South Fork Village first. 16 people died there. The wave smashed through East Conemaugh, killing 50 more. At Mineral Point, it derailed a freight train and hurled the locomotive 300 feet. The engineer jumped clear just seconds before impact. A few residents had managed to organize an informal warning system with runners positioned between the dam and town. But the runners couldn't move fast enough to outpace 40 miles per hour. Some reached high ground and lived. Others were swept away trying to save their neighbors. At 4:07, the wall of water reached Johnstown. The human cost is difficult to comprehend. In minutes, 1,600 homes were destroyed. Families were separated in the chaos. Parents lost children. Children lost parents. Entire neighborhoods vanished under the grinding mass of debris. 2,209 people died that day. It was the deadliest single-day disaster in American history. Clara Barton arrived in Johnstown on June 5, 1889. She brought 5 Red Cross workers and a determination to stay until the job was done. This was the American Red Cross's first major disaster relief operation. Barton would remain for 5 months, distributing $500,000 in aid and establishing the template for modern disaster response. The immediate needs were staggering. 27,000 people were homeless. Entire families had been wiped out. Bodies were still being recovered weeks later. The Pennsylvania Railroad's stone bridge downstream had created a deadly dam of debris that caught fire, burning alive an estimated 80 people who had survived the initial flood. But even as the rescue work continued, another tragedy was unfolding. The legal system was about to fail the survivors as completely as the dam had failed them. Had you ever heard of this before today? Lawyers for the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club moved quickly. They hired the best legal minds money could buy. Their strategy was simple. Blame nature, not negligence. The flood, they argued, was an act of God, an unprecedented natural disaster that no human engineering could have prevented. Survivors and their families filed lawsuits. They had evidence. Engineers' reports, warning letters, testimony about the dangerous modifications. It didn't matter. The club's lawyers successfully argued that the storm was so severe that even a properly maintained dam would have failed. Pennsylvania courts agreed. Case after case was dismissed. The legal precedent was clear. Natural forces, not human negligence, caused the disaster. No member of the South Fork Club was ever held liable. Not legally, not financially, not morally. Andrew Carnegie, the club's most famous member, donated $10,000 to flood relief. He publicly stated he felt no personal responsibility, saying, "I have always done what I could for Johnstown." His donation was generous by contemporary standards, but represented less than 1 day of his income. The victims' families received no compensation whatsoever. The American Society of Civil Engineers saw through the legal maneuvering. Their 1891 report was devastating. The dam failure, they concluded, was entirely preventable and directly caused by the club's modifications. They called it a case of gross negligence that violated basic engineering principles. Their technical analysis left no room for doubt. The removed discharge pipes eliminated pressure relief. The lowered dam height reduced capacity. The fish screens created a deadly bottleneck. Every modification prioritized recreation over safety. But professional engineers have no power to prosecute. Their report became a landmark document in engineering ethics, but it couldn't bring back the dead or compensate the survivors. The pattern was set. Wealth could engineer legal immunity as effectively as it could engineer dams. And this is the pattern I keep seeing. The same forces that create progress also create the conditions for its destruction. Industrial might. Concentrated wealth. The assumption that engineering can be bent to serve convenience rather than safety. The Johnstown Flood changed American engineering forever. The specific failures at South Fork became required study in civil engineering programs. Modern dam safety protocols trace their origins directly to lessons learned from this preventable disaster. The National Dam Inspection Program exists because of what happened in that Pennsylvania valley. Every dam in America is now required to have adequate spillway capacity. Emergency discharge systems are mandatory. Regular inspections are law. Fish screens, if used at all, must be designed not to impede water flow. These seem like obvious precautions now. They weren't obvious to the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, but the legal precedent proved more durable than the engineering lessons. For decades after Johnstown, courts continued to rule that natural disasters absolved human responsibility. Industrial accidents were acts of God. Corporate negligence was force majeure. It would take generations of advocacy to establish that people who profit from dangerous systems must bear responsibility when those systems fail. Prevention is not dramatic, but it saves lives. Modern dam failures are extraordinarily rare, not because nature is more merciful, but because engineering learned from Johnstown. Every safety regulation, every inspection requirement, every spillway calculation carries the memory of 2,209 people who died because convenience mattered more than caution. Despite being the deadliest single-day disaster in American history until September 11th, the Johnstown flood has largely faded from national memory. The successful legal strategy that blamed nature rather than negligence also shaped how the disaster was remembered. As a natural tragedy rather than a preventable industrial accident. This forgetting wasn't accidental. It enabled similar disasters for decades. When we forget how preventable disasters happen, we make them more likely to happen again. These are the stories we owe it to the victims to remember. Not just the tragedy, but the choices that caused it. Not just the flood, but the fish screens that made it deadly. Not just the act of God, but the acts of men that made God's work so devastating. This video is presented for educational purposes. We have relied on official reports, news coverage, and public records in telling this story. If you found this story as compelling as I did, there are more forgotten disasters waiting to be remembered. Subscribe, and let me know in the comments which disaster you think deserves to be told next. The past has lessons for us, but only if we're willing to listen.